How's it guys? Juan from Heever. Welcome back to my third episode on my Lightroom tutorial. Today you're joining me for the first of probably two or three episodes on the develop module, which is where you'll be doing all of your editing. I'm currently in the library grid view, and a quick keyboard shortcut to get into the develop module if you don't want to click there is just to click the keyboard shortcut D, which will take you straight into the develop module. So once again, Lightroom works from left to right. On the left-hand side, you have your navigator, your presets, snapshots, and collections that don't do much, and then your history, which is basically a track log of all the edits you're applying to your image, which you can see in the center. On the right-hand side, you have all of your editing media, if you will. Right at the top, you have your histogram of your image. These are all your local adjustments. So these are all the adjustments that you make on specific parts of the image. And then down here, you have your global adjustments. Before we get started, just a quick tip I can give you guys is to right click on any one of these and to have solo mode enabled. So what solo mode is, it makes sure that only one of these panes can be open at a given stage, which helps a lot with just keeping track of where you are in the editing suite. Then another way to just make it a little bit easier on you is to right click and say custom develop panel. This is a place where you can spot select which ones of these panels you want available to you. I've chosen to hide color grading and calibration just because I don't ever use them and I don't find them useful to my editing techniques. So I just unclick them on the right hand side there and they are no longer in here, although they are still in the program itself. Right, so heading straight into the basic panel, which is basically all your basic color adjustments and exposure adjustments. Right at the top here, you have your white balance, and under white balance, you have your temperature and your tint. Okay, so what temperature does, obviously, it changes the temperature of your image, so you can see what it does here. A quick way to get it back to where it was, if you can't exactly remember where it was, you can just double click on this little slider and it'll take it back to what it was when you imported the image. And then same as tint changes the color from green to magenta. So it's just a nice way to get this right. If your camera did stuff it up a little bit, a lot of the cameras do have their tint a little bit off, and this is just a way to fine tune it under the white balance pane on the basic develop panel. Right, then under here you have your tone, which is obviously your exposure. That's pretty self-explanatory, brighter, darker. And then also under tone, you have your contrast, which the program assesses each image and identifies all the bright and all the dark spots. It makes the brights brighter and the darks darker. If you pull it that way, which gives you a more contrasting image, and then the other way to do the opposite. Highlights, obviously you're removing all the highlights. So this image does have quite a few highlights, so I would take it back quite a bit. And then just underneath highlights, you have your shadows, which obviously allows you to brighten or darken your shadows from very dark to very light and vice versa. I like to keep mine quite open just to have quite a bit of detail everywhere in the image. Whites, obviously everything that is bright will get darkened, as you can see there. And then blacks, obviously toggle your blacks in your image to make them darker or brighter. Right, and then just underneath tone, you have your presence sliders. These three sliders are notorious for being very easy to overdo in an image, and it can make an image look quite bad at the end of the day if you do not use them with caution. Texture obviously toggles your texture in your image, so especially in places like fur and details in branches, you can easily get a lot of texture in them. Sliding it all the way to the left, you can see it does take away quite a lot of the texture and residual sharpness of it. Right, then underneath texture, you have your clarity slider, which basically does a very similar thing to texture. It just dials it up quite a bit. So you can see there it is quite prominent with what clarity does. And it is also quite easy to overdo, especially in color images. Clarity works very well with black and white and HDR content, but with colored images like this, it is very easy to overdo it. So I wouldn't fiddle too much with clarity. Dehaze is a great tool to have, especially when you have hazy content, like an image taken just as the sun's starting to rise and there's still a bit of mist and that kind of thing. dehaze can cut quite well through a lot of the haze, and you can also add a lot of haze into your image. There you can see I've made this whole entire image very hazy, and I can take it all away with the slider. Right, then under presence you have your vibrance and saturation sliders, which are your main color adjustment tools in Lightroom. Obviously moving them to the front adds more color, and moving them to the back reduces color. This is a very easy way to get a black and white image by just sliding, especially saturation, all the way to the left. You're basically left with a black and white image. Then under basic you have your tone curve, which is a very similar thing to what you have here in basic. This straight line can be moved up and down to alter what you have down here. So if you can see, if I paste through them here, all these ones light up as well. You can either adjust things down here on the sliders, or you can just grip it here and just move it up and down. So then a quick rule of thumb, the more S-shaped your tone curve is, the more contrast in your image. So if you move all of these ones to the top and these ones all the way down to the bottom, you can see it's a very, very, very contrasting image. And under tone curve, you have your HSL, or your hue, saturation, and luminance. I think when you open the app on the first time, only one of these will be open. You can paste through them here. I choose to have all on, just to have like complete control and have a look at all of these ones at one stage. Okay, so what hue is an indication for what color it was. So you can see here I have a little bit of green. And if I go to green here, I can make that green very yellow or very blue. So if I take it all the way here, you can see that changes very yellow, and then all the way over to the other side, it makes it almost a aqua or very bluish teal color. Yeah, it's just a nice way to fine tune what color it was. Saturation, obviously same as what we had in basic. If you want to spot increase or decrease certain colors, you can do it here. So if you want to make the blue in the background pop a bit more, I can add a little bit more saturation. If you want to take it all away, if you want to add a little blue and decrease all the green and put a little bit of orange on the Jaguar, or a little bit of yellow as well, you can easily do that with the saturation sliders here. Once again, I can just double click on the name up here, and that'll bring it all back down to 0. And then luminance, just under saturation, is an indication for how bright or how dark you want the colors. So run all the green here very dark, and slide it all the way here, we'll darken it a bit, and then vice versa on the other side, I can lighten it as well. If you're not sure what color is being affected by each one of these sliders, you'll see to the left of each one of these names, there's a little dropper that you can pick up, and then that will, as you paste through the image, you can see them all being highlighted here, what color is being selected. You can just click and then drag up or down, and that will then change the colors accordingly. You can just place it back here and double click if you need to remove anything. Same with the saturation, you can increase or decrease the saturation per your needs. And then color is basically the same as this. It just splits everything, the hue, saturation, luminance, into each color. You can choose to have that selected if that fits your needs more, but I like to keep it on HSL and on all. Then just underneath HSL color is your detail, where you will be doing all your sharpening and noise reduction. As you know, it's very easy to overdo sharpening, so do use caution when you use it. Here you can see a little bit of a closer view, just to see the effects of your sharpening as you move it along. Another way to do this, if you want to have a look at a specific area in the frame, just click this little button here and then move it to wherever you need. So I like to keep it on the eye a lot of times. The camera I used here is a Nikon D850, which does handle sharpening quite well, so I can pump it up to, I'd say, about 75 to 90. But as you can see, it gives you quite a nice sharp image. Then just underneath your sharpening amount, you have radius, detail, and masking. So what radius does is it changes the coarseness of your sharpening. So if I push it up all the way, you can see it's going to be a lot more grainy, and this is great for when you're trying to sharpen a landscape. But for finer details such as hair on an animal, I like to keep my radius either as the default 1, or if I want to bring it down a little bit more, it does look quite good as well. However, the smaller the radius, the less the amount of sharpening is applied. So I would suggest just keeping it at 1 and then changing the amount accordingly. Detail I don't fiddle with too much, and then masking is quite a nifty tool if you only want to sharpen certain areas of your image. So the way masking works is by clicking and holding the slider and then pressing Alt or Option on a Mac, and then I think it is either Command or Control on a Windows computer, and then everything that is white will be sharpened. If I drag it all the way to the right, you'll see I have very little white left, and only the white parts will be sharpened. So if you don't want any of the background to be sharpened, you have to drag it until an area, no, you have to drag it until most of the areas that you don't want sharpened are black, because what is black will not be sharpened and what is white will be sharpened. Once you're happy with your amount, you can just let go of everything and it will only sharpen the areas that were white. So you can see that area hasn't been sharpened, but the hair around the face has been sharpened. Noise reduction underneath sharpening is obviously to remove noise. However, do be careful with the slider, as noise reduction does demolish sharpening quite a lot. So if I drag it all the way here, you'll see my image ends up looking like a bit of a painting. For it to kick in, there we go. So it ends up looking like a painting, on oil painting, which does not look good at all. So use noise reduction sparingly and only in certain circumstances where you really need to use it. Then under the detail pane, you have your lens corrections, where you will be doing stuff like removing chromatic aberration and enabling profile corrections. So chromatic aberration is obviously when you're shooting into a very high contrasting situation, especially with bright light behind it. You'll see, for instance, here on the whiskers of the Jaguar, I have some chromatic aberration, which is this magenta and cyan line on both sides of the whiskers. If I click remove chromatic aberration, the program will run an algorithm and remove all the chromatic aberration. There we go. You can see it's removed it quite nicely. With every single one of my images I ever edit, I always remove chromatic aberration, because you don't always look at every single square inch of your image, and there could be some chromatic aberration somewhere in the image which really doesn't look good. Profile corrections is a not very much of use when you're shooting with a telephoto camera or telephoto lens rather. But if you are using a very wide angle lens and if you have barreling, profile corrections does smooth it out quite nicely, and it removes the barreling almost completely by flattening the horizon quite nicely. So if I take it here, you can see it does a little bit of work, but not too much. Basically just brings the center a bit forward and moves the back side a little bit less. Here you can also see it's picked up what make and model my lens was, and it's quite accurate with what it does. But I mostly just keep it off just because it doesn't really do much to the image. You can then also do the chromatic aberration and profile corrections manually. If you go in here, so distortion would be equivalent to profile corrections. Always click constrain crop, and then you can move the image inwards and outwards. So this is basically what profile corrections does. It just changes it based on the amount of barreling you have. Obviously, if I move it all the way here and I let go, you can see it's altered it quite a bit, and then vice versa there as well. So yeah, it's quite funny. There we go, goes off, and then this is a way to manually remove chromatic aberration. It's called defringe. Here you have your magenta and cyan sliders, which almost looks a bit green here. You can basically just move these sliders around until you're happy with the how Lightroom is removing your chromatic aberration. Then just under lens corrections, you have your transform panel, which basically in a way moves the picture around in ways to, well, if you want it to be moved around, be my guest. But I very rarely use transform. Then just underneath transform, you have your effects panel, which is where you will be adding your vignettes and your grain. So vignettes, obviously moving it to the left darkens it, to the right lightening it. Use vignettes sparingly. I see a lot of images that literally look like that. It's not very appealing. Another quick way to move the slider about, if you don't want to drag it around, is to just keep your mouse on the slider. Make sure that this little light gray box is over the 0, and then use your up and down arrow keys. Moving it down will obviously bring it to the left, and moving it up will bring it up to the right. If you have set a vignette, you can choose to alter the midpoint, which can make it very visible now. You can choose to change the midpoint and the roundness of your image, well, of the vignette on your image, and then to feather how strong you want the gradient to be. And there we go. That is a wrap on the global adjustments in Lightroom develop mode or develop module. Join me next month where I'll be taking a look through the local adjustments. Have a great day, guys. Enjoy, and I'll see you guys soon.